The distress signal. The emergency alarm echoed through the Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council. Representatives from 17 different civilizations turned their attention to the massive holographic display that flickered to life above them. The image showed a planet engulfed in flames, with dozens of unknown warships circling like predators around wounded prey. Lyra, the representative from the bird-like Kethrin species, stood from her seat. Her feathers ruffled with distress as she translated the incoming signal. "It's Velthara Prime," she announced, her voice carrying the weight of terrible news. "The mining colony is under attack. They're calling for immediate assistance." The assembly chamber erupted in concerned whispers and anxious chirps. Velthara Prime housed over 50,000 colonists, most of them civilians working in the mineral extraction facilities. The colony had no military defenses beyond basic security forces. They were completely unprepared for an assault of this magnitude. Council Commander Vorim, a tall reptilian figure with scales that shimmered like polished emeralds, examined the tactical data streaming across his personal console. His cold eyes narrowed as he recognized the attacking force. "Ravagers," he hissed. "A full fleet, maybe 200 ships. They're not just raiding. They're executing a complete extermination protocol. The Ravagers were known throughout the galaxy as the most ruthless scavenger fleet in existence. They specialized in attacking isolated colonies, stripping them of every valuable resource and leaving nothing behind but corpses and ash. No one knew where they came from or what drove them. They simply appeared, destroyed, and vanished into the darkness between stars." Lyra's feathers drooped. "Our peacekeeping forces are deployed across 3 active conflict zones. The nearest fleet is 8 days away at maximum speed. Velthara Prime doesn't have 8 hours, let alone 8 days. The reality of the situation settled over the assembly like a burial shroud. 50,000 lives would be lost, and there was nothing they could do about it. The Council had always prided itself on protecting its member colonies. But the galaxy was vast, and their forces were spread too thin. "We have to do something," insisted Councillor Trem, a small amphibious being whose skin changed colors with his emotional state. Currently, it flickered between deep purple and sickly yellow. "We cannot simply abandon them." Vorim's tail lashed in frustration. "What would you have us do?" "We don't have the ships. We don't have the time. Mathematics and physics don't care about our intentions." Lyra remained standing, her sharp eyes scanning the faces of her fellow representatives. An idea was forming in her mind, one that made her stomach twist with anxiety. She had sworn she would never suggest this, but desperate times called for desperate measures. "There is one species close enough to respond," she said quietly. The chamber fell silent. Every representative turned to look at her with expressions ranging from curiosity to horror. "No," Vorim said immediately. "Absolutely not. We don't have a choice," Lyra insisted. "They're only 2 days away from Velthara Prime. They have the ships. They have the capability. They're from a Class 9 Deathworld," Vorim spat. "Do you understand what that means? Their planet tried to kill them every single day of their evolution. They developed into apex predators because nothing else on their world could be anything less. They're dangerous, unpredictable, and violent." Lyra spread her wings in a gesture of determination. "They're also the only chance those colonists have." Councillor Trem's skin shifted to a thoughtful blue. "She's right. We've allowed humans into the Council as probationary members. If we refuse to call them when we need help, what does that say about us?" The debate raged for another 20 minutes, but in the end, the mathematics won. 50,000 lives outweighed their fear. The vote passed by a narrow margin, and Lyra personally transmitted the distress call to the nearest human vessel. Halfway across the sector, aboard the Terran Defense Coalition warship Taguk's Hammer, Captain Deho was reviewing supply reports when the priority alert interrupted his work. He was a man in his early 40s with graying hair at his temples and eyes that had seen too many battles. His uniform was crisp and professional, but there was something about the way he carried himself that suggested coiled violence waiting to be unleashed. "Captain, we're receiving an emergency transmission from the Galactic Council," reported Lieutenant Hegian from the communication station. She was younger than Deho by a decade, with sharp features and an even sharper mind. She had graduated top of her class from the Naval Academy and specialized in tactical analysis. Deho pulled up the message on his command console. His expression remained neutral as he read through the details, but his knuckles whitened where he gripped the armrest of his chair. They're asking us for help, Hyejin said, unable to keep the surprise out of her voice. The council is actually asking us for help. About time, grumbled Sergeant Minho from his position near the weapons station. He was a mountain of a man, heavily muscled from years of combat training with scars visible on his neck and hands. He had fought in the border wars before humanity achieved faster-than-light travel, and those conflicts had left their mark on him. They're happy to fear us until they need someone to do their dirty work. Stow it, Sergeant, Deho said, though there was no real heat in his words. Minho wasn't wrong, and they all knew it. Humanity's introduction to galactic civilization had been rocky at best. The other species looked at humans and saw monsters wearing civilized faces. They saw the products of a world so hostile that it should have been impossible for intelligent life to evolve there. Earth's gravity was twice what most species considered comfortable. Earth's atmosphere was corrosive to several alien species. Earth's native viruses and bacteria were so aggressive that human immune systems had evolved into biological warfare platforms. The other species feared humans, and humans knew it. But right now, none of that mattered. Right now, there were 50,000 civilians about to die, and the Taeguk's hammer was the only ship close enough to make a difference. Deho stood from his chair. Lieutenant Hyejin, plot a course for Velthara Prime maximum speed. I want us there in 40 hours, 40 hours. Hyejin's fingers flew across her console. Captain, that will push our engines past safety recommendations. I'm aware. Do it anyway. Hyejin nodded and began inputting the navigation coordinates. Course plotted.
Engines spooling up now. Deho activated the ship-wide intercom.
All hands, this is the captain. We've received a distress call from a council colony under attack by Ravager forces. We are the only ship in range to respond. I won't lie to you, this is going to be dangerous. The Ravagers don't take prisoners and they don't run from fights. But there are 50,000 civilians down there who will die if we don't help them. So we're going to help them. All combat personnel, prepare for immediate deployment. All support staff begin pre-battle checks. This is not a drill. We launch in 30 minutes. He closed the channel and turned to Minho. Get your Marines ready, Sergeant. Full combat loadout. I want drop pods prepped and ready to launch the moment we exit faster than light travel. Minho grinned, a fierce expression that would have terrified most aliens. With pleasure, sir. As the Taeguk's hammer accelerated toward the edge of the system, preparing to jump to faster than light speed, the crew moved with practiced efficiency. They were professionals, trained for exactly this kind of situation. But beneath the professional calm there was an undercurrent of something primal. They were going into battle against an enemy known for its brutality, racing against time to save people who feared them. In the medical bay, Dr. Youngmi checked her supplies and began preparing triage stations. In the hangar, pilots ran final checks on their fighters. In the armory, soldiers loaded weapons and tested equipment. The Taeguk's hammer and its 2 escort frigates vanished into faster-than-light travel, racing toward Velthara Prime and the unknown battle waiting there. Back in the council assembly, Lyra watched the confirmation that the human ships had departed. She had done what needed to be done, but she couldn't shake the feeling that they had just made a deal with something they didn't fully understand. Humans were powerful, yes, but what would the galaxy look like once humanity proved just how powerful they really were? The question haunted her as she returned to her seat and waited for news from Velthara Prime. First contact with chaos. The Taeguk's hammer dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Velthara Prime system, and the scene that greeted them was worse than anyone had imagined. The orbital defense platforms that should have been protecting the colony were nothing but floating debris. Ravager warships surrounded the planet like a noose, their weapons hammering the surface with relentless fire. Captain Deho stared at the tactical display with cold fury in his eyes. The readings showed hundreds of impact sites across the main colony. Entire city blocks had been reduced to rubble. Life signs were dropping by the minute. Status report, he ordered. Lieutenant Hyejin's fingers danced across her console, counting 237 enemy vessels. Most are frigates and destroyers, but there are at least 20 heavy cruisers. They've established a blockade formation. No ships in or out. She paused, her voice dropping. Captain, the colony's defensive forces are gone. The Ravagers landed ground troops 4 hours ago. They're hunting survivors. Deho's jaw tightened. 4 hours. They were 4 hours too late to prevent the invasion, but they were still in time to save whoever was left. All ships, battle formation. Target the enemy blockade. We're punching through. Sir, we're outnumbered 70-1, Hyejin said carefully. I can count, Lieutenant. Daeho leaned forward in his chair. They're not expecting us. We use that. Concentrate all fire on their command ships. Minho, are your Marines ready? Sergeant Minho's voice crackled over the intercom from the drop pod bay. Locked, loaded, and ready to rain hell, sir. Good. You launch the moment we breach their line. Daeho opened a channel to the entire fleet. All ships, this is Taeguk's hammer. Weapons free. Show these bastards why you don't mess with a human colony. The 3 human warships accelerated toward the Ravager fleet, at speeds that would have been suicidal for most species. The Ravagers, detecting the incoming vessels, began repositioning to intercept. They expected the standard Council tactics: cautious approach, defensive formations, attempts at negotiation. They got none of that. The Taeguk's hammer opened fire while still at extreme range, its railguns hurling projectiles at a significant fraction of light speed. The first Ravager cruiser exploded before its crew even realized they were under attack. The second managed to raise shields, but human weapons didn't care about shields designed to stop energy weapons. Solid metal slugs traveling at impossible speeds punched through the barriers like they weren't even there. The Ravager fleet scrambled to respond, but the human ships were already among them, moving with an aggression that bordered on insanity. Instead of maintaining safe distances, they closed to point-blank range, their armor absorbing hits that would have crippled Council vessels while their weapons tore through enemy hulls. On the bridge of the Taeguk's hammer, alarms wailed as enemy fire impacted the shields. Hyejin monitored the shield strength with professional calm, calling out percentages while simultaneously coordinating targeting solutions. Shields at 70%. Redirecting power from non-essential systems. Target their engine clusters, Daeho ordered. I want them dead in space. The battle in orbit was brutal and quick. Within 20 minutes, the human ships had carved a path through the Ravager blockade, leaving destroyed and crippled enemy vessels in their wake. The surviving Ravager ships began pulling back, clearly unprepared for this level of aggression. Drop pods away, Minho reported. Daeho watched as dozens of armored pods launched from the Taeguk's hammer and dove toward the planet's surface. Each pod carried a full squad of human Marines equipped for combat on a hostile world. From the Ravager's perspective, it must have looked like suicide, dropping unshielded pods through an active war zone. From the humans' perspective, it was Tuesday. Sergeant Minho's pod hit the ground in the middle of the colony's central plaza, the impact cratering the pavement. The pod's sides blew away and Minho emerged with his squad, weapons ready. The scene around them was carnage. Buildings burned. Bodies lay in the streets. And everywhere, Ravager soldiers hunted through the ruins looking for survivors to kill. The Ravagers were tall, insect-like creatures with 4 arms and exoskeletons that could shrug off most small arms fire. They were efficient killers, evolved for exactly this kind of brutal work. They had never fought humans before. Minho's squad opened fire, and the difference in combat doctrine became immediately apparent. Where Council forces would have taken cover and established defensive positions, the humans advanced. They moved in coordinated teams, covering each other's movements while maintaining relentless forward pressure. Corporal Jiwan took a plasma bolt to the shoulder that would have killed most species instantly. She grunted, stumbled, and kept moving. Her armor's medical systems injected combat drugs directly into her bloodstream, keeping her on her feet and fighting despite an injury that should have incapacitated her. Contact left, she called out, firing her rifle one-handed while dragging a wounded alien civilian toward cover with her other hand. The Ravager she targeted went down, its exoskeleton cracked by the high-velocity rounds. Private Siak vaulted over a ruined wall and landed in the middle of a group of Ravagers. At close range, they tried to tear him apart with their clawed hands, but human reflexes, honed on a high-gravity Deathworld, were faster. Siak's combat knife found the weak points in their armor, and 3 Ravagers fell before the others could react. All across the colony, similar scenes played out. Human Marines hit the ground and immediately went on the offensive, pushing the Ravagers back through sheer ferocity and determination. The aliens had expected easy prey. Instead, they found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to die even when mortally wounded, that fought with a savagery that seemed impossible. In a residential sector on the colony's outskirts, a group of civilians huddled in a basement shelter, They could hear the sounds of battle overhead, the roar of weapons fire, the screams of dying ravagers, and occasionally, the shouted commands in that harsh, growling language the humans spoke. One of the civilians, a young Veltheran named Tillis, peeked through a crack in the doorway. He saw a human soldier, Minho, standing in the street surrounded by dead ravagers. The human was bleeding from a dozen wounds, his armor cracked and scorched. But he was still standing, still fighting, still protecting the building where civilians hid. Tillis had seen humans before, on news broadcasts and diplomatic footage. But seeing one in person in combat was different. This wasn't a monster. This was a warrior fighting against impossible odds to protect people he didn't even know. Dr. Youngmi arrived with the second wave, her medical transport touching down in a cleared area near the colony's main hospital. The hospital itself was damaged but still standing. Inside, she found the local medical staff overwhelmed and terrified. The chief medical officer was a delicate, multi-limbed being named Drell. He stared at Youngmi with wide eyes that held equal parts hope and fear. "You're human," he said, stating the obvious. "I'm a doctor," Youngmi replied, already assessing the wounded. "That's all that matters right now. Show me your worst cases." Drell hesitated, then led her to the critical care ward. The injuries were horrific. Burns, traumatic wounds, exposure to toxic gases. Many of the patients were dying, and there was nothing the local doctors could do about it. Youngmi set to work with a calm efficiency that belied the chaos around her. Human medicine, developed to treat injuries on a world where everything tried to kill you, was brutally effective. She had treatments for trauma that council doctors had never even heard of. Her surgical techniques, designed for battlefield conditions, allowed her to save patients that should have been beyond help. Within an hour, she had stabilized 24 critical patients. Within 3 hours, she had trained the local medical staff on human emergency procedures. Within 6 hours, she had saved more lives than the colony's entire medical staff combined. Up in orbit, the battle was winding down. The Ravagers, facing losses they never anticipated, began retreating. Their hit-and-run tactics were useless against an enemy that not only refused to run, but actively hunted them down. Captain Daiho received the reports from the ground teams. The colony was secured. The Ravagers were in full retreat, and remarkably, the majority of the civilian population had survived. On the bridge, Lieutenant Hygiene allowed herself a small smile. "We did it, Captain." Daiho nodded slowly. "Get me a casualty report. I want to know the cost." The numbers came in over the next hour. 15 human Marines killed, 43 wounded, but over 48,000 alien civilians saved. By any military standard, it was an overwhelming victory. But as Daiho looked at the names of the fallen on his display, he felt the weight of those 15 lives. They had come here to prove humanity could be trusted, to show the galaxy that humans were more than just Deathworld monsters. They had proven it. But the question now was whether the galaxy would understand what they had witnessed, or whether they would simply be more afraid than before. On the surface, Sergeant Minho sat on a piece of rubble, letting the medical techs patch his wounds. Around him, alien civilians emerged from their hiding places, staring at the human soldiers with expressions that Minho couldn't quite read. Young Tillis approached slowly, holding something in his small hands. It was a piece of fruit, one of the local varieties. He offered it to Minho with Trem, the Aftermath, and Revelation. 3 days after the battle, Velthara Prime was still recovering from its wounds. Reconstruction crews worked around the clock to repair damaged buildings, while human engineers assisted with restoring power and water systems. The colony that had been on the verge of complete destruction was slowly coming back to life. But in the temporary command center established in what remained of the Colonial Administration building, a different kind of battle was taking place. Ambassador Tajin had arrived from Earth 48 hours after the battle, his diplomatic shuttle touching down to find a colony saved but a political situation on the verge of explosion. He was a man in his late 50s with silver hair, and the kind of face that could smile while delivering terrible news. He had served in the diplomatic corps for 30 years, most of that time trying to convince the galaxy that humans deserved a place in civilized society. Now he stood in a room with Council Inquisitor Vorim, watching combat footage from the battle, and he could see all his years of careful diplomatic work unraveling. "This," Vorim said, his scaled hand gesturing at the holographic display, "is exactly what we feared." The footage showed Corporal Jiwan fighting with a wound that should have killed her, continuing to engage the enemy even as blood ran down her armor. "Your species fights like rabid animals. No regard for your own safety. No sense of proportion." Tejan kept his voice calm. "With respect, Inquisitor, that rabid animal saved 17 civilians while wounded. She could have fallen back for medical treatment, but she chose to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. She should have been dead," Vorim countered. "The wound was fatal. Any civilized species would have collapsed immediately." "Any civilized species wouldn't have evolved on a world where collapsing means death," Tejan replied. "We evolved to keep fighting because on Earth the moment you stop fighting is the moment you die." Lieutenant Hyejin entered the room carrying a datapad. She had been summoned to explain the tactical decisions made during the battle. She stood at attention, her uniform crisp despite days of minimal sleep. Vorim turned his cold gaze on her. "Lieutenant, I've reviewed your tactical logs. You ordered your ships to close to point-blank range with enemy vessels. That's not standard military doctrine. That's suicide." "With respect, sir, standard military doctrine is designed for species that can't survive high-impact collisions," Hyejin replied. "Our ships are built heavier, with more armor because we come from a high-gravity world. What would destroy a council ship barely scratches our hulls. We use that advantage. You took unnecessary risks. We took calculated risks to minimize civilian casualties," Hyejin corrected. "Every extra minute we spent in a safe standoff battle was another minute the Ravagers spent killing colonists on the ground. So yes, we risked our lives to save theirs. I thought that was the point of a rescue mission." Vorim's tail lashed in agitation. "You don't understand the concern here. Your species has been part of the galactic community for less than 5 years. You have warships that can tear through our best defenses. You have soldiers who fight beyond the point of death. You have technology we don't fully understand, and now you've demonstrated that you can defeat an enemy that has terrorized the galaxy for decades. That makes you dangerous." "More dangerous than the Ravagers?" Tejan asked quietly. The question hung in the air. Vorim didn't answer, which was answer enough. In another part of the colony, Sergeant Minho sat in what had been a small park before the battle. Most of the vegetation was burned or trampled, but someone had placed a bench here, and he found himself drawn to the spot during his off-duty hours. Tillis, the young Veltheran who had offered him fruit after the battle, had started visiting him there. The boy's family had died in the initial attack, and he had latched onto Minho with the desperate need of someone who had lost everything. "Why did you come?" Tillis asked in his quiet voice. His species communicated partly through color changes in their skin, and right now he was showing the pale blue of sadness mixed with curious green. Minho took his time answering. "Because you needed help, but your people are scary. Everyone says so. Even before you came, the adults would talk about humans and their scary death world." Tillis's color shifted to yellow-orange, indicating confusion. "But you saved us. You got hurt saving us. Why would scary people do that?" Minho looked at the small alien child and saw his own daughter's face for a moment. She was back on Earth, safe in their home, playing in parks that didn't have burned vegetation and broken buildings. He had joined the military to keep her safe, to make sure she grew up in a universe where people like the Ravagers couldn't hurt her. "Being scary and being bad aren't the same thing," Minho said finally. "We're scary because we're dangerous, but dangerous can also mean protective. A guard dog is scary to strangers, but it protects its family." Tillis considered this, his colors shifting thoughtfully. "So humans are like guard dogs for the galaxy?" Minho chuckled. "Something like that, kid." In the medical facility, Dr. Youngmi was making a discovery that would change everything. She had been analyzing blood samples from the colonists who survived the attack, trying to understand why some had gotten sick while others showed no symptoms. The Ravagers had used some kind of biological agent during their attack, but the local doctors couldn't identify it. Youngmi found it in the tissue samples. It was a toxin, designed to attack the nervous system and cause a slow, agonizing death. The molecular structure was elegant in its cruelty. It bypassed most standard medical treatments and was nearly impossible to detect until symptoms appeared. But what fascinated and horrified Youngmi was that several colonists, who should have died from exposure, showed almost no symptoms at all. When she checked their medical records, she found the common factor. They had all been in close proximity to human soldiers during the battle. She pulled up her own medical scans and found traces of the same toxin in her bloodstream. Then she checked the other human medical staff. All of them showed exposure, and none of them showed any symptoms. Her hands shook slightly as she ran the analysis again, making sure she wasn't making a mistake. But the results were clear. The Ravager's bioweapon was deadly to most species in the galaxy. To humans, it was barely an irritant. Their Deathworld immune systems treated it like a minor infection and eliminated it within hours. More than that, the colonists who had been near humans had been protected by ambient exposure to human antibodies and immune responses. Just being around humans during the crisis had saved their lives. Youngmi immediately requested a meeting with Ambassador Taejin and Inquisitor Vorim. When she presented her findings, the room fell silent. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Vorim said slowly. "The Ravagers used a biological weapon that should have killed everyone in this colony. But the human immune systems were so aggressive that they not only protected the humans, but also created a protective effect for anyone nearby." "That's correct," Youngmi confirmed. "Our immune systems evolved to fight off pathogens on Earth, which are far more aggressive than anything found in the wider galaxy. From our body's perspective, this Ravager toxin was child's play. So when we called humans to help," Vorim continued, "we didn't just call in military support. We called in walking biological shields." Taijin saw the opening and took it. "Inquisitor, I understand your concern about humanity's capabilities. We are dangerous. We won't pretend otherwise, but consider what you've just learned. The same harsh world that made us into efficient warriors also gave us the tools to survive things that would kill other species. We're not just weapons, we're also potentially the key to surviving threats like the Ravagers." Vorim was quiet for a long moment, his reptilian features unreadable. "I need to report this to the Council," he said finally. That evening, Captain Deho stood on what remained of the colony's observation deck, looking out over the settlement as the sun set. The damage was still visible everywhere he looked, but there were also signs of recovery. Lights were coming back on in repaired buildings. People were walking the streets again. Life was returning. Lieutenant Hyejin joined him, standing at attention until he waved her to ease. "The Council wants us to stay for another week," she reported. "Help with the reconstruction. Apparently Inquisitor Vorim wants more time to observe us." "Let him observe," Deho said. "We've got nothing to hide." "Do you think this will change anything, sir? The way the galaxy sees us?" Deho considered the question. "I don't know. We showed them we can fight. Youngmi showed them we can heal. Maybe that's enough. Maybe it's not." He turned to look at his lieutenant. "But we did the right thing. We saved lives. That has to count for something." Down in the temporary diplomatic quarters, Vorim was preparing his report to the Galactic Council. He had come to Velthara Prime expecting to confirm his worst fears about humanity, that they were dangerous barbarians barely controlled by a thin veneer of civilization. What he found was more complicated. Yes, humans were dangerous. Yes, they fought with a ferocity that was terrifying to watch, but they also fought to protect others. They risked themselves for strangers, and their very biology, the same Deathworld biology that made them into warriors, also made them. The Ravager counterattack. The call came in the middle of the night cycle aboard the Taguk's Hammer. Captain Deho was reviewing after-action reports when his console lit up with a priority alert. The signature was from Intelligence Officer Jeha, and the encryption level was maximum security. Deho opened the channel immediately. "Report." Jeha's face appeared on the screen. He was a thin man with sharp eyes that never seemed to rest. Someone who saw patterns where others saw only noise. He had been monitoring Ravager communications since the battle at Velthara Prime, and he looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Captain, we have a problem. A big one." Jeha pulled up a star map on his display. "I've been tracking the Ravager fleet movements after their retreat from Velthara Prime. They didn't scatter. They regrouped. And sir, they've been calling in reinforcements." Deho leaned forward. "How many?" "Over 800 ships, sir. The largest Ravager fleet ever assembled." Jeha's fingers worked across his console, highlighting a trajectory line on the star map. "And they're not heading for another remote colony. They're heading directly for Nexus Prime." The color drained from Deho's face. Nexus Prime was the capital world of the Galactic Council, home to over 3 billion inhabitants representing every species in the Council. It was the political, economic, and cultural heart of galactic civilization. If the Ravagers destroyed Nexus Prime, the entire council would collapse. Time to target? Deho demanded. 4 days at their current speed. The council is mobilizing their defense forces, but assembly will take at least 2 weeks. Sir, Nexus Prime has planetary shields and orbital defense platforms, but nothing that can stand against 800 warships. They'll be slaughtered. Deho was already pulling up fleet positions on his own console. Where's the nearest human battle group? We're it, sir. The 7th Expeditionary Legion is in the Outer Rim, but they're 6 days away even at maximum speed. Get them moving anyway, and get me a direct line to Earth Command. Priority 1. For the next hour, Deho coordinated with Earth's military leadership. The discussion was tense. The 7th Expeditionary Legion was humanity's finest fighting force, led by Commander Samin, a legend who had fought in some of humanity's bloodiest conflicts before they reached the stars. Deploying her forces to defend Nexus Prime would leave the human territories vulnerable. But the alternative was watching the galactic capital burn. In the end, Earth Command authorized the deployment, not because they were sure it was the right choice, but because letting Nexus Prime fall would doom any chance humanity had of being accepted as equals in galactic society. Deho transmitted the orders to Commander Soman personally. Her face appeared on his screen, a woman in her 40s with scars visible on her jaw and a gaze that had seen too much death. She listened to the briefing without interruption, then nodded once. We'll be there, Captain. Tell the council to hold on. The cavalry is coming. Aboard the Tegek's Hammer, the crew prepared for the largest battle any of them had ever faced. In the pilot ready room, Lieutenant Kangman reviewed flight patterns with his squadron. He was young for a squadron leader, barely 30, but he had proven himself in a dozen skirmishes since humanity joined the stars. His co-pilot, Yunji, sat beside him running equipment checks. She was quieter than Kangman, more methodical but just as skilled. They had flown together for 2 years and knew each other's instincts better than their own families. 800 ships, Yunji said quietly. We're bringing 40. That's 20 to 1 odds, Kangman tried to smile. I've survived worse odds. No, you haven't. Okay, you're right, I haven't. Kangman set down his datapad and looked at his co-pilot. Yunji, can I ask you something? Why are we doing this? Defending a capital for people who are terrified of us? Who would probably celebrate if we all just disappeared tomorrow? Yunji was quiet for a moment. Because it's the right thing to do. And because if we don't, then we prove them right. They think we're monsters. We have to show them we're more than that. And if we die showing them, then at least we die as heroes instead of monsters. In the Marine barracks, Sergeant Minho addressed his troops. They were the survivors of Velthara Prime, bandaged and scarred but ready to fight again. Human resilience wasn't just physical, it was mental. They recovered from trauma faster than most species, bounced back from defeat quicker, and somehow found the will to keep fighting when any sane being would surrender. I'm not going to lie to you, Minho told his assembled Marines. This is going to be bad. We're outnumbered, we're outgunned, and we're fighting to protect people who think we're scary monsters. He paused. But you know what? They're right. We are scary. We are monsters. But we're their monsters now. And we're going to show those Ravager bastards what happens when they threaten our people. The Marines roared their approval. Weapons raised high. 3 days later, the human fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Nexus Prime system. The 7th Expeditionary Legion had made it with hours to spare, pushing their engines past safety limits to arrive in time. Combined with the Tegek's Hammer and its escorts, humanity had assembled a force of 40 warships, against 800, Commander Soman's flagship. The Soul's Wrath took position at the center of the formation. She opened a channel to all ships, her voice calm and steady. All vessels, this is Commander Soman. Today we face impossible odds. Today we stand between civilization and chaos. Today we prove that humanity deserves its place among the stars, not because we're the strongest, not because we're the smartest, but because when the galaxy needed someone to stand in the fire, we were the ones who stepped forward. She paused, letting her words sink in. I won't order you to fight. I won't order you to die, but I will fight and I will die if necessary, to protect those 3 billion souls on that planet. If you're with me, then let's show the galaxy what humanity is really made of. The response was immediate. 40 ships, thousands of human warriors all choosing to stand and fight. No one retreated. No one questioned. They were here, and they would hold. The Ravager fleet arrived 2 hours later, dropping out of faster-than-light travel in a massive formation that blotted out the stars. 800 warships, their weapons already charging, their intent clear. They had come to destroy, and nothing would stop them. Nothing except 40 human ships. Captain Deho watched the tactical display as the enemy fleet advanced. All ships hold formation. Let them come to us. Make them work for every meter. The Ravagers opened fire first, massive volleys of plasma and kinetic weapons crossing the void. The human ships' shields flared as they absorbed the hits, energy readings spiking into the red, but they held. Return fire, Deho ordered. The human fleet responded with a precision that spoke of countless drills and battle-hardened experience. Railgun slugs and missiles streaked toward the enemy formation, finding targets with lethal accuracy. Ravager ships began exploding, but more moved in to take their place. Lieutenant Hyejin coordinated the tactical data, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Enemy fleet splitting into 3 attack groups. They're trying to flank us. Let them try, Deho replied. All ships tighten formation. Overlap shields. We make ourselves a wall they have to break through to reach the planet. Kangmin and Yunji launched in their fighter, joining dozens of other pilots in the space between the fleets. Fighter combat in space was 3-dimensional chaos with threats coming from every direction. But human pilots, with their Deathworld reflexes and high-gravity training, excelled in this environment. Kangmin rolled his fighter through a gap between 2 Ravager destroyers, his weapons tearing into their exposed engines. Yunji covered his back, shooting down enemy fighters that tried to intercept them. They moved as one unit, anticipating each other's movements without needing to communicate. On the ground, in the bunkers beneath Nexus Prime's capital city, 3 billion civilians waited and hoped. They could see the battle in orbit through news feeds, watching as a tiny human fleet held the line against impossible odds. The images were terrifying and awe-inspiring in equal measure. Council Representative Lyra watched the battle from the council chambers. She had called humanity to Velthara Prime. She had vouched for them. And now they were dying to protect her people. She felt the weight of that responsibility crushing her chest. They're doing it, Councillor Trem said beside her, his skin showing colors of amazement. They're actually holding. They're dying, Lyra corrected quietly. Look at the casualty reports. 7 ships destroyed already, thousands dead. But they're not retreating, Forim said from behind them. The Inquisitor stood at the observation window, watching the distant flashes of battle. Any other species would have run by now. But they're still fighting. In space, the Teguk's hammer took a direct hit to its port side. The explosion tore through 3 decks, venting atmosphere and killing dozens of crew. Damage reports flooded the bridge. Port shields down, Hyejin reported. Hull breaches on decks 7 through 9. Reactor output dropping. Deho gritted his teeth. Divert all power to weapons and engines. If we're going down, we're taking as many of them with us as possible. The battle raged for hours. Human ships fought with desperate courage, buying time for the Council's defense forces to arrive. Every minute they held was another minute for 3 billion civilians to live. But the mathematics of warfare, the battle for Nexus Prime, the battle had been raging for 6 hours. The space around Nexus Prime was a graveyard of broken ships and floating debris. Of the 40 human vessels that had entered the fight, only 19 remained combat effective. But they had held the line. 3 billion civilians still lived below, and the Ravagers had been unable to break through to orbital bombardment range. Commander Samin stood on the bridge of the Soul's Wrath, her ship scarred and burning but still fighting. Blood ran down her temple from a head wound she hadn't bothered to treat. Around her, the bridge crew worked with mechanical efficiency despite their injuries and exhaustion. Enemy flagship identified, her tactical officer reported, designating as Target Alpha. It's coordinating their entire fleet. Soman studied the massive vessel on her display. It was easily 3 times the size of her own ship, bristling with weapons and surrounded by a defensive screen of smaller vessels. Taking it out would require getting closer than any ship could survive. All vessels, this is Commander Soman. We're going for their command ship. Follow my lead. If we can cut off their head, maybe the body will die. Captain Deho received the order aboard the Teguk's hammer. His ship was barely holding together. The port side was exposed to vacuum. They were down to 30% shield capacity and half his weapons were offline. But they were still flying, still fighting. You heard the commander, he told his crew. Set course for that flagship. Full power to engines. Lieutenant Hyjin looked at him with understanding in her eyes. She knew what he was planning. They all did. Captain, at our current damage level, we can't survive a close approach to that ship. I know, Deho said quietly. But we can make our deaths count for something. The remaining human ships formed up behind the Soul's Wrath and accelerated toward the enemy flagship. The Ravagers, sensing the threat, repositioned to intercept. Space filled with weapons fire as the two forces collided in a brutal close-range engagement. On the surface of Nexus Prime, Ravager drop pods had breached the planetary shields in 3 locations. Ground forces were moving toward population centers, intent on causing maximum casualties even if their fleet was losing in orbit. The Council's ground forces were mobilizing, but they were slow, disorganized, and unprepared for the Ravagers' brutal efficiency. The city of Lumina, home to 2 million civilians, was directly in the path of the largest Ravager ground force. Lieutenant Hyjin had been monitoring the ground situation between managing the space battle. She pulled up the tactical map and felt her blood run cold. The Ravagers would reach Lumina in less than an hour, and there was nothing between them and the civilians except a few thousand lightly armed security forces. She turned to Sergeant Minho, who was coordinating the Marine deployments from the bridge. Sergeant, we need ground forces at Lumina immediately. Minho looked at the map and shook his head. We've got maybe 200 Marines left combat ready. The dropships are all deployed or destroyed. We've got no way to get them down there in time. Then we use what we have, Deho said. He had been listening to the exchange. Minho, take everyone you can spare. Use the escape pods. Sir, escape pods aren't designed for combat deployment. They're designed to get people to the surface alive. That's good enough. Deho met his sergeant's eyes. Go, those people need you. Minho nodded once, then headed for the launch bay at a run. 15 minutes later, a stream of escape pods launched from the crippled human ships and dove toward Nexus Prime's surface. Each pod carried 4 to 6 Marines with whatever weapons and equipment they could carry. It was improvised, desperate, and completely insane. The pods hit the ground in the outskirts of Lumina, their emergency retros barely slowing them enough to avoid killing their passengers. Minho's pod cratered into what had been a public park, the impact jarring his bones and teeth. He kicked the door open and stumbled out, his rifle ready. Around him, other pods were landing, Marines emerging battered but alive. 200 humans against an army of Ravagers. The math was terrible, but humans had never let mathematics stop them before. Form up, Minho ordered. We hold them here. Not one Ravager gets past us. The Marines established defensive positions using rubble and destroyed vehicles. They had no artillery support, no air cover, and limited ammunition. What they had was training, determination, and the knowledge that 2 million civilians depended on them. The Ravagers came as a wave of chittering, screeching death. Thousands of them, moving with insect-like coordination, intent on overwhelming the human defenses through sheer numbers. The humans opened fire. Marine Hana crouched behind an overturned transport, her rifle bucking as she fired in controlled bursts. She was hit twice in the first minute, her armor absorbing impacts that would have killed her without protection. She kept firing. Next to her, a Marine named Junho took a plasma bolt to the leg and went down. Hana dragged him to cover, applied emergency sealant to the wound, and went back to shooting. Corporal Jiwan, still recovering from her injuries at Velthara Prime, led a counterattack when the Ravagers tried to flank their position. She moved with a limp, her shoulder still healing, but her aim was perfect. 12 Ravagers died before they realized what was happening. Sergeant Minho was everywhere at once, directing fire, repositioning his troops, dragging wounded Marines to safety. He had been fighting for 6 hours straight without rest, and his body was running on combat drugs and pure willpower. A Ravager clawed open his armor on his left side, leaving bloody tracks. He shot at point blank and kept moving. In orbit, the battle was reaching its climax. The human fleet had broken through the defensive screen around the Ravager flagship. The Soul's Wrath and 3 other ships were in close-range combat with the massive vessel, their weapons hammering at its shields. The Teguk's hammer was dying. Multiple hull breaches, reactor critical, shields completely down. Captain Deho had ordered non-essential personnel to evacuate, but most of the escape pods were already deployed to the surface. Only the bridge crew and a handful of engineers remained. "Captain, we've lost main power," Heejin reported. Her console was dark, running on emergency backup. "Weapons offline. Engines at 15%. We're dead in space." Deho looked at the tactical display, watching as the Ravager flagship's weapons charged for another volley. One more hit would tear the Teguk's hammer apart. He thought of his crew, the people who had trusted him to lead them. He thought of the civilians below, still alive because his ship had held the line. He thought of his family back on Earth who he would never see again. He made his choice. "Everyone off the bridge," he ordered. "Get to the remaining escape pods." "That's an order." Heejin stood her ground. "Sir, we're not leaving you." "I said that's an order, Lieutenant. And I'm refusing it, Captain." She met his eyes steadily. "You need someone on navigation if you're going to ram that flagship. So I'm staying." Daiho wanted to argue, to pull rank, to physically throw her off the bridge if necessary. But there was no time. The Ravager flagship was already firing. Kangmin's voice came over the comms. "Captain, this is Delta Squadron. We see what you're trying to do. We'll clear you a path." "Negative, Delta Squadron. Get clear." "Sorry, sir, comms are breaking up. Can't hear you." Kangmin's fighter, damaged and leaking fuel, accelerated toward the Ravager flagship alongside 5 other battered fighters. They fired everything they had at the flagship's weapons ports, drawing fire away from the Teguk's hammer. Yunji's voice was calm in Kangmin's ear. "It's been an honor flying with you." "Same to you. Yunji, see you on the other side." The fighters slammed into the Ravager flagship's shields, their reactors detonating in brilliant flashes that momentarily overloaded the defensive barriers. It was enough. The shields flickered and died. "Now, Lieutenant," Deho ordered. Heejin pushed the engines to emergency power. The Teguk's hammer, broken and burning but still flying, accelerated toward the exposed flagship. Time seemed to slow. Deho could see every detail of the enemy ship growing larger in the viewport. He could hear the groaning of his own ship's structure, the alarm's warning of imminent reactor breach, the quiet breathing of Lieutenant Heejin beside him. "It's been an honor serving with you." "Sir," she said quietly. "The honor was mine." "Lieutenant," the Teguk's hammer struck the Ravager flagship at the bridge section, its reactor detonating a microsecond later. The explosion was visible from the planet's surface, a new star burning briefly in the orbital battle space. When the light faded, the Ravager flagship was gone, torn into pieces by the internal explosion. And with it, the coordination holding the Ravager fleet together collapsed. On the ground, Sergeant Minho saw the Ravagers suddenly falter, their coordinated attack dissolving into confused chaos. He didn't know what had happened in orbit, but he knew an opportunity when he saw one. "Push forward. Don't let them reorganize." The Marines surged ahead, driving the confused Ravagers back. The battle that should have been a slaughter turned into a rout. The Ravagers began retreating, their morale broken along with their command structure. In orbit, Commander Soman watched as the surviving Ravager ships broke formation and fled into faster-than-light travel. The battle was over. They had won, but the cost was staggering.